Well, I guess it's somewhat encouraging that, the Soviet Union collapsed despite the United States and its actions. So that might be hopeful for the fall of the Chinese Communist Party. It'll happen despite our own repeated ignorance and greed. But I did want to talk about what the CCP has learned from the Soviet Union. And originally I want to talk a lot about influence operations, but I think it's also interesting to talk about what the Chinese Communist Party learned from the fall of the Soviet Union, because obviously that's something they want to avoid.
Yeah, they were intensely interested in that as a study. They still study it within the party now, and to learn from those mistakes and how to address them. So they're much wiser, because the Soviets never thought they could collapse. Although the KGB, the secret police in the Soviet Union, was fearful of a collapse. So KGB was actually driving a lot of the reforms within the Soviet Communist Party because they knew the truth. Not even the party members knew the truth.
That's interesting that maybe today in China there is a group of people who do know the truth.
Well, I think there is that danger of drinking your own Kool-Aid, right?
Yeah.
Well, so, because Chris, you just asked like a bunch of different questions about the Soviet Union, but maybe we can start with...
No, I asked one.
Yes, you did.
I did. I asked what China learned from the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but I want to get to... Well, okay, yes, that's what happened. But I'm interested, Mike, in terms of the Soviet influence operations sort of during the height of the Soviet Union. How was the Soviet Union able to, or what did they do that was successful at influencing the U.S. narrative about the Soviet Union, or the U.S. discourse about the Soviet Union? How do they do those influence operations?
Well, the Soviet system was really state of the art at the time. They worked in two main separate ways. First was through control of international communist parties, which was big in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but it sort of was going out of style in much of the world after that. But they still had controlled communist parties. So nearly every communist party in every country in the world was controlled by the Soviets, including the very small one in the United States. That didn't matter in terms of winning elections, but what mattered was the subversive elements of any communist party, which was to infiltrate mainstream parties and universities and think tanks and news organizations and so forth with their own controlled people. And that's where the Soviets were very effective. So one can credit or blame the KGB as a very professional service in terms of stealing secrets as an intelligence organization. But I think even more important was the influence operations that the KGB ran, which had a much stronger effect on saving the Soviet Union for as long as it could. If you think of the reason why the United States and its allies don't have real defense against incoming missiles beyond the short-range one, that was because of what the Soviets called an active measures campaign that they began in the 1980s to make sure that the United States would never have a missile defense system. And it worked. And we still don't have one. So we have, we can get the shorter range ones, but you can see through, say, Israel's Iron Dome, which was the U.S.-Israeli system, how wonderfully it works. And those are just against very crude missiles. Once we have a way to shoot down intercontinental ballistic missiles, whether they're Russian or People's Liberation Army or anyone else, we would neutralize the effectiveness of their strategic weapons force and therefore any real effects that they might have on forcing our hand on something. So the Soviets were very successful with that. They were successful in stopping boycotts of the Soviet economy. They were successful in getting pipelines built to Europe. And this was in the 80s, to make Europe dependent on Soviet gas and to have Europe as the real source of hard currency to keep the Soviet economy alive. Now, Reagan fought that in a magnificent covert operation by allowing General Electric to sell turbines to power the Soviet gas lines in Soviet Central Asia. But they had a software defect in them that would cause them to overheat and explode and destroy the pipeline, which is precisely what happened in one very celebrated case, and it set back the Soviet pipeline for many, many years. The Soviets were also very skilled at working with proxies. So if you're looking for Russians under every rug, it might not be Russian. It might be a West German. It might be French. It might be a Cuban. It might be, someone from any part of the world who is actually a Soviet agent who's working as a surrogate, either under direct KGB control or indirectly through the security services of, say, the Cubans or the East Germans. We really underestimate the Cubans. They were really good at political warfare and subversion, and they remain among the best in the world at that. And they're helping the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, when we talk about Soviet influence operations, I always think about how Bernie Sanders had his honeymoon in the Soviet Union, correct? How does that happen?
Wherever you get your kicks, I guess. But he was here's a guy who let's presume he is, quote, only a socialist who chose to go to the Soviet Union just because he's a contrarian and likes to shake up the system. So let's not ascribe ill motives to him. Throughout his entire political career in the House of Representatives and the Senate, he reflected Soviet active measures themes. He magnified them. He worked them into discourse. And even though he was considered a fringe element in Congress at the time of the Soviet Union, he was still a very important point as a magnifier or a repeater. Okay, so Bernie Sanders, as an openly socialist member of Congress, working within the Democrat Party, repeated the Soviet propaganda line, as did a number of other members of Congress from Massachusetts, New York predominantly, where they had old Communist Party ties under Soviet control. So Sanders is not originally from Vermont. He's from Brooklyn, which is sort of the center of the U.S. Communist Party in the United States. Now, I don't know if he is or was a party member, but he was certainly raised by them and grew up around them, and he was never hostile to the Soviet Union. Again, as you said, taking his honeymoon there during the Cold War. So, but he wasn't the only one. There are other members of Congress who were not as radical, who were also repeating these Soviet active measures lines. And we found actually in our documentary research in Moscow from the Soviet Communist Party General Secretary's vault that Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts had reached out to the KGB in 1977, saying that he wanted to run for president of the United States and that he would help the Soviets if the Soviets would help him. And there's a series of correspondence between then KGB Chairman Yuri Andropov as memoranda to the Soviet Politburo, reporting on what Kennedy wanted. And then what he ended up getting paid was in oil from Angola for his family's home heating oil charity in New England to help people through the cold winter. And then when Angola decided after the Soviet collapse to cut this off, the oil came from Hugo Chavez in Venezuela to the Kennedy Family Foundation. But we have these actual documents from Gorbachev's personal archive signed by KGB Chairman Yuri Andropov previously when Brezhnev was running the Soviet Union. And then memos from the KGB to Andropov when he was Communist Party chief, and later, and Gorbachev was on the Politburo at the time. So this is a case of a United States senator putting himself secretly, but I mean plainly for the Soviets, at the service of Soviet intelligence to suit his own political interests.
That's shocking. That's actually could be a good topic for our upcoming History channel.
Did that make a splash at all? I don't remember ever reading anything about this related to Ted Kennedy.
Yeah, this was written by a Russian journalist named Yevgenia Albats, and she was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard when she did this project. And she didn't understand American politics, so she thought, hey, the Boston Globe will love this. It's a local story. Or, of course, the Boston Globe editorially would bury a story like that, which it did. So she had this in a book that she wrote about the KGB called The State Within a State. And then Paul Kengor at Grove City College had some other archive material from the same cache of documents. And I was there in 1992 when Evgeny Albatz got them. And so Kengor reprinted a 3-page KGB report about Ted Kennedy and his activities and who he was working through and who his California interface was. It was a guy named David Carr. David Carr was a writer for the Daily Worker, which was a Stalinist newspaper published in New York in the 1930s and 40s. He then went on to work in the civil rights movement, which got J. Edgar Hoover after him because he was a Soviet agent, and then went to work with then Senator Alan Cranston of California and Senator John Tunney of California. So it was David Carr was the KGB go-between with Senator Ted Kennedy through former Senator Tunney. It's all in these documents, and it's fascinating, but they never would have been seen the light of day had these journalists and human rights activists not sacked certain KGB buildings and Gorbachev's own, archives for all the Communist Party general secretaries. Think of what's in the CCP archives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm wondering now, because there's a lot of disbelief, I think, in CCP influence operations in the U.S. and the idea that people could be being influenced by the CCP or that there's infiltration in different there's a lot of pushback to the investigation the FBI is currently doing into academics, right, who have worked with China and the Thousand Talents program, things like that. There's a lot of accusations of racism about that. And I think in some individual cases, it seems like the FBI's investigations have not panned out. But I think in general, there's this disbelief that this could actually be happening. In the U.S. at the time, or after the fall of the Soviet Union, was there the recognition that the Soviet influence operation had gotten as big and deep as it has gotten, or was there just a lot of kind of denial and sweeping it under the rug since, the Soviet Union's not around anymore anyway?
Yeah, it depends on who you listen to. So people who are their job is to find these things, they would get it right away. But your average person, regardless of politics, would say, oh, come on, that's crazy talk. This is McCarthyism. This is just tinfoil hat talk. And then they would try to just kill the discussion that way. Now they say, with the case of China, oh, you're just a racist. So that's the standard excuse too.
Yes, Shelley, you're just a racist.